So Tocqueville begins the chapter by going to the definition of democracy. He begins a general discussion of the power of the majority by going back to first principles. The essence of democratic government is that the dominion of the government of the majority be absolute. And so the democracy is that form of government that gives power to the majority. And this has taken on, according to Tocqueville, a certain extreme form in the United States. That's partly a matter of the laws that the legislator, the branch of government that forms the laws, is made up of people elected popularly and for a short time. So the will of the people is very often exercised and directly over those who make the laws. And this is different according to the different states, but he sees this general trend. Beyond this, there are other things that contribute to the power of the majority. There are even states where the majority elects the judges. This is contrary, perhaps, to the theory of the separation of powers, that according to the classic theory about how government should be arranged, it should have different roles for different agents. It should have an executive that carries out the laws, a legislature that makes the laws, and a judiciary which judges the application of the laws. And those different responsibilities would balance power among them. But what Tocqueville sees is that in the United States, all of those things come back to the majority, so that even the judiciary, which ought to be independent, perhaps people of long experience and proven judgment would be made judges for life, so that they wouldn't have to answer to anyone but their own understanding of right and wrong and the history of the Constitution. But in the United States, even the judges have to answer to the voters. The executive power answers to the legislature and therefore to the voters. And so everything tends to favor the power of the democracy, which means the absolute power of the majority. And customs, he says in the one-line paragraph in the middle of the right column, customs go farther than laws. So there are two powers. One the actual laws written down, and then the style, the habits, the common opinions of the place. That points in the same direction. That in the United States, the majority has a clean conscience about its right to rule. In the last paragraph on the page, the moral dominion of the majority is based in part on the idea that there is more enlightenment and wisdom in many men combined than in one man alone. So that in the United States, there's the belief that if people join together to make a decision, that's a superior decision, rather than believing that the few wise would make the right choice. So to read on in the paragraph, that the wisdom is more in number than the choice of legislators, that if they choose a lot of them and therefore they are representative of the people, that they will make good choices, rather than selecting a small minority who would have special powers, extra wisdom, extra talent. That's not the way it goes in the United States. So Tocqueville says, last line of the page, it is the theory of equality upon their minds. So, they democratize even something that tends to be distinctive about human beings. We're all more or less equal, say, in our strength and our speed and our health, but we're different in our minds, and yet America has democratized even the mind. And to switch over to page 2 at the top, this doctrine attracts the pride of man in its last refuge. Tocqueville is very interested in knowing where there might be space to be different, where you could hold out against the chief power. And he finds that there isn't much space in the United States, and that when the people are the chief power, then it's harder to avoid their authority than when other sorts of people are in power, when you have a monarchy or an aristocracy. That turns out, at least in Tocqueville's account, to be more favorable to liberty than when the majority rule. So, second paragraph on the page, top of the left column. The idea that the right to govern society belongs to the majority because of its enlightenment was carried to the soul of the United States by the first inhabitants. This idea, which alone would be enough to create a free people, has today passed into the mores, and you find it in the least habits of life. So, as I say, the majority in the United States has a clean conscience about exercising its power. It feels that it has the right, and because of its enlightenment, says Tocqueville, because of the quality of their ideas, the newness of their arrangements, they're being unbeholden to any history which might distort things and tie the way of life to some old custom or habit whose origin was not clear. That doesn't happen in the United States. They think of themselves enlightened and therefore feel free to exercise power, and that this democratic spirit extends to all phases, the written down laws and the mere customs and every habit of the people. So at the bottom of the left-hand column, if a class of citizens existed in America, that the legislature worked to strip of certain exclusive advantages held for centuries. So this seems to be a reference to France. That's the way it was, right? That there was an old aristocracy and the revolution took their powers away. And that he wanted to bring down from an elevated position and restore to the ranks of the multitude. The Duc de Tocqueville, who used to be legally more important than everybody else, is now reduced to being a common citizen. In that case, says Tocqueville, it's probable the minority would not easily submit to its laws, as in France, even having lost its legal authority and having had the history canceled by the revolution. Nevertheless, the habits live on, and the older great families still have more wealth, more power, more authority than normal people, and yet that is not the official doctrine of the country, and therefore they are more divided. And whereas in the United States, there is no hesitation about giving complete power to the majority, top of the right-hand column. But since the United States was populated by men equal to each other, no natural and permanent dissidence is yet found among the interests of the various inhabitants. And so everybody in the United States started out as an immigrant, a foreigner. Everybody started over. There was no history of the great and the noble as opposed to the common. And so there isn't that natural descent. There isn't a natural alternative to the power of the majority. So, second paragraph in the right-hand column. In France, it seems clearly what Tocqueville has in mind. In France, the aristocracy is just different from the majority, and it can't allow itself to be democratized. It can't think of itself as just ordinary citizens, or everything powerful and distinctive about it would disappear, and so it remains the permanent opposition after the revolution in democratic France. But in the United States, third paragraph down, everyone agrees on the power of the majority, because if you're not in the majority now, you hope to become so. You hope to win the next election. If you lost the last one, you'll hope to win the next one. And therefore, there's complete agreement on the power of the majority. Some people are in it and some people are out of it. But everybody out hopes to be in. And everybody in wants to be protected when they're out. And so there's a basic agreement that no one should contradict the power of a majority. So they have there's a certain deference to the greater power that you can see described in the third paragraph on the left. Before the revolution, the French thought the king could do no wrong. If he did well, they praised him. If he didn't do well, they blamed his ministers. No one would openly blame the king. But in America, the people are king, and the same immunity applies. No one criticizes the great power. No one holds the majority accountable if there are mistakes. You might say that the special interest corrupted them. Some ministers got in the way of the majority exercising its rights, but no one would say that the majority was wrong. And so, second to last paragraph, right column rather. So in the United States, the majority has an immense power, in fact. Right? So the legal power goes to the majority, and it's very strong. Second line, and a power of opinion almost as great. Right? All the hard power goes to the majority, and most of the soft power as well. And once the majority is formed on a question, there is, so to speak, no obstacle that I will not say stop, but even slow its course. So once the majorities make up its mind, it can't be stopped. And as Tocqueville says, it's not even a question of stopping it, but just slowing it down a little. That doesn't happen. And that is a kind of tyranny, he says. So the consequences of this state of affairs are harmful and dangerous for the future.